You are tuned in to Love Your History, hosted by Preston Love Jr.
Well, hello, I'm Preston Love Jr., and I welcome you, and I'm so grateful to be with you again today. But I want to welcome you to our new podcast called Love Your History with me, Preston Love. And on this regular podcast, we'll be talking about the African American culture and history and heritage. On a monthly basis, we will be with you every first Wednesday on this wonderful network. It's my pleasure. I would say that on this particular show, that I have increased enthusiasm because this is really the first show. And so let's not tarry on that. I want to say that in order to indicate your interest on this show, may I just take 30 seconds about why me talking about Love Your History? Well, let me first say that I'm 80 years old and I've lived and experienced history. I have been involved in the observance and the participation in history. I was born in 1942, and I was raised right here in Omaha, in North Omaha. I have lived the history. And so on my show, over the next coming episodes, we'll be talking about all aspects of the African American culture and history, both nationally and locally. May I also say that I am a professor at the University of Nebraska here in Omaha in the Black Studies Department. And I participate as a regular participant in trying to assist North Omaha in making history. So that's my introduction to our new show called Love Your History by and with me, Preston Love. I want to start today by talking about something that is occurring before your eyes. And it is as much making history as it is history in itself. However, all of these things, quite frankly, are evolving from our illustrious history, the good and the bad and the ugly of our history. May I say that also that I'm a writer. I have written 5 books, 2 of which are children's books, and that every year, you should know, every year, I take 40 high school kids and anywhere from 20 to 40 adults on a Black History tour. It is designed for the youth, but we go on a Black History tour to teach our youth and so that they reach a point, so guess what? They would love their history. But we take them to Memphis, Tennessee. We take them to Jackson, Mississippi. We take them to Birmingham. We take them to Tuskegee. We take them to Selma. We walk them across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We take them to Montgomery, and we take them to Atlanta. May I say also that we do this with all expenses paid. But we're teaching our youth something that they're not aware of, quite frankly, and unfortunately. We teach them their own history, their African American history. And we're doing this every year. So I say this because what is on my mind today, and what I want to share with you is some breaking news about the history of North Omaha, the local history, and then with reference to my annual tour that I just described. We just returned in the last 2 weeks from that tour. I believe we had maybe one of the best tours ever this year. We had a great crop of students. By the way, our students now are very diverse. We have, of course, white and black students, but we have Hispanics, Jewish, Africans of several nations, and more. So we appreciate the group that we have each year, and the group that we have each year is different. They have a different group personality. They have a different way of engaging or not engaging in the lessons that we're trying to teach them. We go on this trip, and it could be called a fun trip, but it's not designed to be fun. It is designed to teach our youth their own history, and then for them to learn it, for them to respect it, and may I add, to love it, and then to go out and make history. That's what we're trying to do. We just got back. We had a wonderful time this year. We go to Memphis for all of its history. We, of course, go to the Lorraine Hotel where Martin Luther King was assassinated. And we go and we learn all of the aspects of why he was there. Do you know why he was there? He was there to support the sanitation workers in Memphis. In fact, one of the early and first real entry into something other than just civil rights and voting rights. He began to look ahead and begin to involve himself in the economics and the economic rights and the economic impact of things on Black people and Black communities. He was in Memphis to support the sanitation workers, and that's when he was assassinated. And so we go to Memphis and we learn those lessons. We also go, while we're in Memphis, we go to the Mason Temple, which is the home of the very large Church of God in Christ, the headquarters, the international headquarters of the Church of God in Christ is in Memphis. And in the temple that is there, the iconic temple, is where Martin Luther King made his last speech before he died. So we go there and we go inside that temple and learn about it and learn about and feel the emotional impact of being in that temple and the emotional impact of looking into the room that Martin Luther King laid and slept before he woke up that next day and was assassinated. That's partly what we do in Memphis. We go on from there to Jackson, Mississippi. And Jackson, Mississippi is where Emmett Till was hung and he was lynched and he was beaten and thrown over into the bridge, across the bridge, into the water, the Tallahassee, to be specific. And we learn about that horrible death and all of its history. It was in 1955. May I mention historically that I believe that really the civil rights movement in earnest, and the one that we know of and think of when we talk civil rights movement, began in the mid-50s. And Emmett Till's death in 55 was part of that beginning. It also could be noted that in 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education was a part of that beginning, as we finally had a Supreme Court decision that broke open and destroyed the segregation, or at least legally, in our schools. We surely got in former episodes to talk about segregation in schools right here in Omaha, Nebraska. But we go to Mississippi to learn that history. And while we're there, we go to the home of the civil rights leader of its time, Medgar Evers, the great civil rights leader who was gunned down in his own driveway with his kids and his mother and his wife inside the house. We went to his house and looked at the driveway. May I say, all of these face-to-face things that we do are very roller coaster for our emotions. There is no way to look into the room where Martin Luther King was killed or the driveway where Medgar Evers was assassinated in his own home driveway without having an emotional tug. So we go to Mississippi and we learn about the Emmett Till and Medgar Evers and Fannie Lou Hamer and so many others. We leave there and we go to Birmingham, Alabama, and we visit some of the iconic places there. One of the main ones is the 16th Street Baptist Church. You may know that history, and maybe you don't. But in the 16th Street Baptist Church, which was a meeting place as the African Americans in Birmingham fought for their civil rights, may I say that church was a meeting place, but on one Sunday afternoon between Sunday school and the church service, the Ku Klux Klan planted a bomb that exploded and killed 4 little African American girls and injured nearly 20 or more as well in the 16th Street Baptist Church. So we go there and then we walk across the street from the church and we go to the Kelly Ingram Park. Some of you may not recognize the name, but I think verbally that I could make you see the Kelly Ingram Park, because you may have the images of dogs biting and hoses being turned on to the civil rights foot soldiers. That much of that was done in Kelly Ingram Park because that's where they assembled before they marched and they met before they assembled. And so the police and others attacked them with dogs and fire hoses. All of that in Birmingham and more. We leave there and we go to the iconic and one of the greatest known Black, one of the historical Black colleges and universities known AKA or known as the HBCUs, Tuskegee University, Booker T. Washington, and all of its history. And not only that, but those of you who are students and know of the Tuskegee Airmen, they were trained on that campus, in the back of the campus, and at where there's an airport. All of that, we take the kids, those young people, I should say, to Tuskegee. And we, in some cases, talk a little bit about the opportunities at all of the HBCUs, including Tuskegee. We leave there and we go to Selma, Alabama, and all of its history. And that history is centered around the 1965 Bloody Sunday March with John Lewis across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and all of its history. All of its history and all of the history centered around, well, to some degree, King, but the history was mostly centered around John Lewis and Jamie Lee Jackson, who was killed during that process. There were actually 3 marches. The first one was the bloody one. They were marching for what? They were marching for the voting rights. May I comment and say that in your understanding of the history of the struggle for our rights, there were really 2 circles, really 3 or 4 that could be talked about. There was the civil rights, there was the voting rights, there was the housing rights, there was the economic rights. The ones that get the most attention are not more important than the other ones. But once in 1964, as the communities across the South and across the nation fought for civil rights, there was a time in 1964 where 4 young men who were there to demonstrate and march and fight for the civil rights in Mississippi. They fought and they fought, and they were arrested. And one particular night, 3 young men were arrested, and they were released purposefully about midnight when it was dark. And their names were Cheney, Goodman, and Smyrna. And they were released, as I say, on purpose in the middle of the night. And as they drove away from the jail and drove down the country road, they were pulled over by a police vehicle, and they were taken out and beaten to death. They became martyrs, and as a result of the publicity of all of that and the horribleness of all of that, may I mention that their perpetrators were never really prosecuted, but may I say that they were killed in 1964, and it was their deaths that really was the reason for and what really became the final point as it relates to the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So that particular fight, if you will, for equal opportunities under the law and for the civil rights and all of that, the civil rights, if you will, many ways you could describe it. But the civil rights battle was brought to a head with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I mention it in the context of all of the 5 that I mentioned: the civil rights, the voting rights, the economic rights, the housing rights. All of those together were really on the agenda for the civil rights movement. So theoretically, in 1964, after the death of those 3 young men, the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed by, signed by what was then the president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. But I make this point because I leap forward to the tour that I was describing about us going to Selma and going across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That was in 1965, after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Now the attention of the civil rights movement moved from civil rights to voting rights. And that's what the fight was about when John Lewis and Martin Luther King and so many others were there at Edmund Pettus Bridge to demonstrate and to bring to the attention of the nation and to the counties there in Alabama that Black folks were not allowed to register and vote. They were allowed, in some cases, only if the Black folks met some unbelievable impediments. I could talk about those. Don't want to take a lot of time with them, but you could register as a Black in Alabama at that time if you could count the number of jelly beans in a jar, if you could pay a very large tax called poll tax, or if you could prove that your grandfather or grandmother voted before you. It definitely had not happened. And so all of that and more, the impediments to voting made it virtually impossible for Black folks to register and vote. And so that was being addressed and focused for some period of time by the civil rights movement, focused itself on Selma, Alabama. And so John Lewis led, because Martin Luther King was not in town, he led the first march attempt to cross the bridge, because the march, if you don't know, was intended to go something like this. And there were thousands of people in the march. They were going to march from Selma, Alabama, to the capital city, Montgomery, about 55 miles. Take you a long time, but that's what they had planned to do, to make it dramatic and then go to the steps of the state house and demand that Blacks be given the right to vote. That was the plan of the Selma Civil Rights March. So in order to get from Selma to Montgomery, the first stage of that is the bridge, that the Edmund Pettus Bridge, by, just let me mention that as Pettus was a Ku Klux Klan member, but to cross that bridge before you begin the large, long march to Montgomery. And so the confrontations by the civil rights movement was in fact right there on the front end, right there at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a now iconic bridge. May I say that there is much talk right now about making that bridge, renaming it to the John Lewis Bridge. So I'm talking and reminding you that I'm sharing with you the history tour that I take young people on every year that we just returned from, and giving you a step-by-step of our agenda. We leave Selma and we go next to several places in Montgomery, a very complex set of things to do in Montgomery that includes the history in and around the 1955, may I mention to you, if you're keeping up, the 1954 Brown versus Education, the 1955 killing of Emmett Till, and now we're talking about the 1955 bus strike in Montgomery, which began by the courageous move of Rosa Parks. And so we go there and we learn the story of Rosa, but we learn the great, courageous story of the residents of Montgomery who refused to ride the buses once the horrible bigotry and discriminatory practices as it relates to Blacks on public buses was exposed. And so that demonstration, the bus boycott, lasted a year. It brought the bus company to its knees because they were getting most of their revenue from Black folks riding to and from work. And so, and they won that fight because that fight was the bus company capitulated and changed the policies. And also part of the victories that they hired Black bus drivers and Black mechanics. The bus strike was a very great victory in the mid-50s. I mentioned the dates again because I'm making the point that those dates were the beginning of what the civil rights movement was about for another 13 years as we know it, the civil rights movement as we know it. But we go there on our tour, and we go there to Montgomery to learn what I just mentioned. But we also go to very important other places, among others, is we go to the newly designed and the new museum called the Equal Justice Initiative, which is there in Montgomery. Oh, what an emotional place to go. It commemorates, it showcases, it mourns over nearly 5,000 men, Black men, women, and children who were lynched. They do it in a very dramatic way. You'll have to go for yourself. We take those young people to the memorial to commemorate there. And they are commemorated on in a way that does it. It is organized by county, by state. And so when you move around and you see these lynchings all over the South and some in the North, they're commemorated by state and county, and voila, you walk up and you see Nebraska, Douglas County, and you see our two lynchings. One in 1919, Will Brown, and one in 1891, George, AKA Joe Cole, George Smith, both lynchings in our city, from our city, are commemorated in Montgomery, along with all the other horrible acts by racists. And so we go there and all of that history and more. And then while we're there, we go over to the Legacy Museum that is a expose of slavery and all of the horribleness of slavery. And it's displayed in some very dramatic ways. They just moved to a new facility, by the way. Very emotional place to go. And when you go, there's some jars. There's a wall full of jars. And one of them has on it Douglas County, Omaha, Nebraska. And the jar is full of dirt. And the dirt is the dirt of the area where Will Brown was lynched. And he was shot 100 times and then burned to a crisp, if you don't know that story. And so, oh my goodness, we're in our sixth day, on our fifth day, our sixth day, we go to Atlanta, the final day. We do the obvious. We go, as I mentioned, we go to where Martin Luther King was raised, where he went to church. We actually go to the house where he grew up. We go to Ebenezer, where his dad and mom were the minister and first lady of Ebenezer Baptist Church. We go there, we go to the King Center, to the crypt where he, Martin Luther King, and his wife Coretta are memorialized and buried there in the midst of the King Center. We do all of that, but we also visit the iconic Black community in Atlanta and some of the 5 or 6 great colleges and universities. So all of that, I summarize my first show by saying that is what we do to teach others Black history and to get others and you, quite frankly, to love your history. And so in future shows, we surely are going to talk about some details about the evolution of our culture and our history. And that includes on the national scale. And we're going to correlate that with the history and culture and good, bad, and ugly of our own sweet North Omaha. And in future shows, we've got lots of breaking news because it is my feeling that loving your history is one thing, but you must also continue to make history. And so with that, I say thank you for listening and watching, and I'll see you on the first Wednesday of next month.
This has been Love Your History, hosted by Preston Love Jr. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communication production.